It was supposed to be a quiet evening, the kind of evening where nothing unusual happens. He had just come back from work, tired in the same predictable way he felt every day. His shirt was still slightly damp from the misty air outside, and his shoes carried traces of mud from the short walk home. He placed his keys on the wooden table near the door, the same place he always put them, and let out a slow breath as he loosened his shoulders. The rented house wasn't big, but it was enough for one person. Enough for someone who didn't mind silence and didn't expect anyone to knock on the door or call unexpectedly. He moved around the small kitchen, warming up leftovers from the night before. The sound of the microwave humming made the space feel less empty, almost comforting. Outside, clouds gathered, heavy and dark, promising a storm that no one truly wanted. The smell of rain was already in the air. He had noticed it on his walk home, the way the sky seemed to press lower than usual. As if trying to touch the rooftops, he ate slowly at the small table tucked against the window, watching the first raindrops hit the glass. They fell softly at first, making delicate tapping sounds that blended with the hum of the fridge. Then the rain grew stronger, beating against the window with more force, as though it carried some sort of urgency. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It wasn't very late, but the storm made it look like night had arrived earlier than expected. He stood up, washed his plate, and wiped down the table. He didn't like leaving things unfinished, not even small chores. It gave him a sense of control, something steady to hold on to in a world where things often changed without warning. Once he was done, he walked to the couch and turned on the small lamp beside it. The warm yellow light filled the room, giving it a gentle glow. He liked evenings like this, simple and quiet. He had just settled down with a book when the power flickered. The lamp dimmed for a second, then brightened again, only to dim once more. He looked up, waiting. The bulb steadied eventually, but the sudden uncertainty of the light left a strange feeling in the room. He sighed softly and leaned back, letting the book rest on his lap. A few minutes passed, nothing unusual happening. The rain stayed heavy, and the wind pressed against the window. He turned a page in his book, his eyes scanning the words, though his mind drifted away now and then. He thought about work, about how tomorrow would look exactly the same as today. He wondered if this was how life was supposed to feel, predictable, steady and lonely in a quiet kind of way. Then, out of nowhere, a soft knock sounded at the door. It was so faint at first that he wasn't sure he had heard it correctly. It might have been the rain, maybe something blown by the wind. He paused, waiting, listening. The house settled around him, the way homes sometimes do in silence, making its own small noises. Another knock came, a bit louder this time. He froze. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the book. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. He rarely had visitors, almost never in fact. No one had said they were coming. The sudden sound felt out of place, like something that didn't belong in his carefully quiet world. He placed the book on the couch and got up slowly. His heartbeat wasn't fast, but it felt heavier than usual. He walked to the door with steady steps, each one echoing softly on the wooden floor. As he approached the door, another knock came, this time urgent, as if the person outside needed to be heard. He hesitated, standing in front of the door without touching the handle. He listened closely. He could hear the rain pouring down, the wind pushing against the small porch, and then a faint sound. A voice? No, more like a soft cry or whimper. He took a breath and slowly unlocked the door. When he opened it, he was met with a wave of cold air and the sound of heavy rain hitting the ground. Standing there, shivering, was an elderly woman drenched from head to toe. Water dripped from her hair, her coat, even her shoes. She looked frightened and tired, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the collar of her wet coat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He stared at her with uncertainty, surprise, and a bit of confusion. She looked up at him with pleading eyes, eyes that carried both fear and exhaustion. Her voice was weak when she finally spoke, barely audible above the rain. "I'm sorry. I think I'm lost." Her words were simple but heavy, carrying a kind of sadness that made him forget his hesitation. He stepped aside without thinking too much and gestured for her to come in. She hesitated for a moment, almost as if she didn't want to trouble him, but the cold pushed her forward. She stepped into the warm light of the house, leaving puddles of water behind her. He closed the door quickly, shutting out the storm and locking it again. The rain continued pounding outside, but inside the house there was a new stillness, a new presence. He looked at the elderly woman, trying to understand what might have brought her here. Her coat was soaked through, and her hair clung to her face. She looked exhausted, confused, unsure of where she was. Her breathing was shaky, as though she had been walking for a long time without rest. "Please, sit down," he said gently, pointing to a chair near the heater. She nodded, her lips trembling, and slowly walked over to the chair. He could see the way her hands shook. He wondered how long she had been wandering in the rain. He grabbed a clean towel from a drawer and handed it to her. She thanked him softly and began drying her hair and face. He watched her for a moment, unsure of what to say next. The situation felt strange, unexpected, and yet something inside him told him that turning her away would have been wrong. This wasn't a moment to be cautious or distant. It was a moment to be human. "Do you know where you were trying to go?" he asked carefully. She looked down at her hands, then up at him with a worried expression. I'm not sure anymore. I left home earlier, but then it got dark, and the rain started, and I think I lost my way." Her voice carried a deep uncertainty, the kind that comes from fear mixed with confusion. He realized she might not just be lost physically, she might be struggling to remember. "Do you have a phone?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I forgot to bring it. Do you have someone I can call? Maybe a family member?" She nodded slowly and gave him a number. He dialed it right away, but the call didn't go through. He tried again, listening carefully to each ring, but no one picked up. He didn't want to worry her, so he kept his expression calm. "They're probably busy," he said softly. "We'll try again soon." She nodded, though her eyes looked troubled. She wrapped the towel around her shoulders, trying to warm herself. The heater helped, but her shivering had not fully stopped. He stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. He wasn't used to comforting strangers. He wasn't used to comforting anyone, really. But something about her vulnerability made him feel responsible in a way he had never felt before. "Would you like some warm tea?" he asked gently. Her eyes softened with gratitude. "Yes, thank you." He walked to the kitchen and prepared a cup of tea, trying to steady his thoughts. He wasn't scared exactly, but the situation pulled him out of his usual quiet world. It made him feel things he hadn't expected to feel: concern, empathy, curiosity. When he returned with the tea, she accepted it with both hands, holding the cup close to warm her fingers. She took a small sip and closed her eyes briefly, as if savoring the warmth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to bother anyone. I didn't know where else to go." "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here. We'll figure it out." His words surprised even him. He wasn't the type to reassure others, yet they came out naturally. The storm outside continued with full force, but inside the house, the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer just a quiet evening in a quiet home. It was something unexpected, something meaningful. As she sat there, warming her hands around the cup, he found himself studying her face, not in a rude way, but in a curious, gentle way. She had kind eyes, worn with age, but full of depth. There was a gentleness in the way she looked around the room, as if trying to understand where she was and why she had ended up here. He wondered if she had a family who missed her. If someone was out there searching in the rain, worried sick, he hoped they were safe too, wherever they were. Minutes passed quietly, the only sounds being the rain and the soft hum of the heater. She sipped her tea slowly, her hand still trembling slightly. Though not as much as before, he sat across from her, not wanting to overwhelm her with questions. Finally, she looked up and met his eyes. "Thank you for opening the door," she said softly. Not everyone would have. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. But inside, her words settled deeply. He had never thought much about kindness. He lived simply, keeping to himself, avoiding situations that required emotional effort. But looking at her now, he felt something shift, a quiet realization that sometimes life brings a moment where you either step forward or step back. And tonight, he had stepped forward. He had no idea that opening the door would be the beginning of something important. Something he couldn't yet understand, but something that would change not just her night, but his life too. And as the rain continued to pour outside, he found himself hoping maybe, for the first time in a long while, that this unexpected moment had arrived for a reason. The rain kept pounding against the windows. But inside the small house, the air felt calmer, warmer, even though both of them were still trying to understand the strange situation they had landed in. The elderly woman sat near the heater, her damp coat folded neatly beside her. Her hair was still wet at the ends, but her shivering had reduced. She held the cup of tea with both hands, as if the warmth inside it was the only steady thing she could feel right now. He stood a few steps away, unsure of what he should do next. He wasn't used to having company, and certainly not a stranger who had arrived drenched and frightened. His mind kept shifting between worry and responsibility. What if she slipped and fell outside?
What if no one was looking for her?
What if someone was, and they were worried out of their mind right now? The thought pulled at him in ways he didn't expect. The woman took a slow sip of her tea before looking up at him again. Her eyes were tired but calm, as if now that she was inside, she could finally catch her breath. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice quiet. "I don't mean to trouble you. I just couldn't tell where I was." Everything looked different in the rain. "It's all right," he said softly. "You don't need to apologize." She nodded gently, though he could see she still felt uneasy. People like her, soft-spoken, polite, and a little lost, always carried guilt, even when they had no reason to. He sat down in the chair across from her, leaving enough space so she didn't feel crowded. The warm yellow light from the lamp spread across the room, making the shadows softer. "Do you remember where you were going?" he asked, careful not to sound demanding. She shook her head slowly, her fingers tightening around the cup. "I thought I was walking toward home, but then the rain, and the dark, and I couldn't remember which road I had taken." He listened closely. Her voice had cracks in it, tiny breaks that made him wonder if this wasn't the first time she had gotten confused. Maybe she had been trying to stay independent. Maybe she didn't want to burden anyone. Maybe she didn't want to admit she needed help. He tried calling the number she gave him again. The same result.
Oh.
The ringing went on and on, each beep echoing in the quiet room, until eventually it cut off. He didn't say out loud that no one picked up again. She didn't ask. She just stared at the heater, her shoulders rising and falling slowly. He didn't want her to worry more than she already did. He placed the phone on the table and leaned forward a bit. "Don't worry. We'll reach someone soon. Maybe the rain is making the lines busy." She nodded, her lips pressed together, but her eyes seemed far away, almost ashamed. He wondered if she felt embarrassed for not remembering things clearly. That kind of fear was deeper than any storm outside. He stood and made his way to the small kitchen area. "Have you eaten anything?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. "Not since afternoon." He didn't know many people who forgot to eat, unless they were distracted or struggling with something deeper. He took out some bread, warmed a bowl of soup he had made earlier, and brought it to her. "You can have this," he said. "It's warm. It'll help." Her eyes softened again. "Thank you. You're very kind." He didn't feel like he was doing anything special. But somehow, seeing her gratitude made the small act feel bigger. She took slow spoonfuls of the soup.
Ouch.
He watched her quietly, not wanting her to feel observed, but wanting to make sure she was all right. Every few seconds, she glanced up at him as if searching for reassurance that she wasn't bothering him. "You live alone?" she asked softly. "Yes." She nodded slightly, absorbing the answer. "This house feels peaceful." He almost smiled. "It's quiet, at least." "Quiet is good," she said. "Sometimes noise makes the mind more confused." Her words hung in the air, carrying more meaning than she probably intended. He wondered how many times she had felt her mind slipping away from her. How often she tried covering it up so the people around her wouldn't worry. The storm outside intensified. A loud crack of thunder shook the house slightly. She flinched, and the spoon in her hand trembled for a moment. It's all right, he said quickly. It's just thunder. It'll pass.
Yo.
She nodded, but her fear lingered, her eyes drifting toward the windows as though the storm could reach inside. He took a slow breath, wondering what he should do next. He wanted to help her, really help her, but he didn't know her address, and the only phone number she gave wasn't responding. Calling someone else felt wrong since she hadn't asked for police or emergency help. And she didn't seem injured, just confused, cold, and lost. Do you remember anything about your home? He asked gently. She held the cup close to her chest, thinking. I remember a small garden. In a tree near the window? I remember a lamp in the living room. It's warm and soft, like the light in your house. He listened carefully, trying to picture what she was describing. A lot of homes had small gardens. A lot of homes had a warm lamp. The details weren't enough to know where she lived, but something about the way she spoke made it clear. She wasn't just lost in the streets. She was losing pieces of her memory too. The realization sat heavy in his chest. She finished her soup, set the bowl down gently on the table. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door, she whispered. You didn't, he said, his voice firm but warm. It's all right, really. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out if he truly meant it. Then she nodded, her eyes softening. He stood from the chair and walked toward the window. The rain had slowed a little but was still steady. He didn't like the idea of her leaving in this weather. Even if the rain stopped, it was already dark and the roads were slippery. He couldn't risk her wandering out again and getting lost worse than before. He turned back to her. You can stay here until the rain stops, he said gently. It's too dangerous to go out right now. Her eyes widened slightly, surprised. I don't want to take your space. You're not, he said simply. This house has room, and it's safer than outside right now. She took a slow breath, then nodded. Thank you. Truly, he prepared a small blanket for her to wrap around herself and placed it on the couch. She shifted closer to it, her movements slow and careful. He sat across from her once again, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in. But it wasn't a heavy weight. It was a meaningful one. Minutes passed quietly. She looked around the room again, almost studying the walls and the furniture. Her eyes soft and thoughtful. This place feels familiar, she murmured. He looked up. Familiar how? She shook her head gently. Not like I've been here before. More like it feels safe. Like something I remember from long ago. He didn't know how to respond, but her words touched him in a way he didn't expect. He had never thought of his home as anything special. Just a small, rented place that served its purpose. But to her right now, it felt like shelter. It felt like trust. The storm softened even more, thunder fading into distant rumbling. Would you like to try calling the number again? She asked quietly. He nodded and reached for his phone. He dialed the number once more, letting it ring longer this time. He watched the woman closely, hoping for her sake that someone answered. But again, no response. Her shoulders dropped slightly. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. But something in her eyes dimmed. He hung up gently. Maybe they stepped out, he said softly. We'll try again a little later. She nodded, accepting his words, even though doubt sat clearly on her face. She leaned back on the couch, the blanket wrapped around her small frame. He could see how tired she was, the exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. You can rest if you want, he said. You look tired. I am, she admitted. It's been a long evening. He nodded. Just close your eyes for a bit. I'll be right here. She hesitated at first, as though unsure if she should let her guard down. But eventually she relaxed her shoulders, closed her eyes, let out a slow breath. He watched her with a quiet sense of protectiveness. She looked so fragile, so small in the large blanket. The thought of her walking alone in the storm made his chest tighten. He sat there in silence, listening to the softened rain and her steady breathing. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know why she had gotten lost or what she was truly facing in her life, but he did know one thing: he couldn't let her wander out alone again. Tonight, he didn't expect a visitor when the knocking first started. He didn't expect his quiet evening to turn into something meaningful. But sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it brings someone to your door not by accident, but because you're the person who's meant to open it. He didn't know it yet. But helping her tonight would push him into a decision he'd never imagined he'd make. A decision that would shape not only her safety, but also his own understanding of kindness, responsibility, and what it means to truly care. As she rested on the couch and the storm slowly faded, he realized that this unexpected visitor had already changed something inside him, and the night wasn't even over. The night had grown quieter, the storm reduced to a soft drizzle, tapping gently on the windows. The elderly woman slept lightly on the couch, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her breathing was calm, but every now and then she twitched slightly, as if something in her dreams kept pulling her attention. He sat nearby, keeping a soft lamp on, so she wouldn't wake up disoriented in the dark. He didn't usually stay awake this late. Most nights he slept early, keeping his routine steady and predictable. But tonight didn't feel like any other night. He couldn't bring himself to sleep while she was resting there, vulnerable and lost. Something inside him insisted he'd stay alert just in case she needed anything. He watched her for a moment, thinking carefully. The number she had given him still didn't work. No response, no text, nothing. He wondered who the number belonged to, maybe a son, a daughter, a neighbor, or a caretaker. Whoever it was, he hoped they were safe and that they would eventually return the call. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand across his forehead. A slow breath escaped him. He didn't ask for this situation, but now that it had arrived, he couldn't imagine turning away from it. After a while, she stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. She looked around the room for a moment, her expression confused, almost frightened. Then her eyes met his, and she relaxed. "I must have fallen asleep," she said softly. "You needed the rest," he replied. "Are you feeling warmer now?" She nodded, pulling the blanket a little closer. "I am, thank you." He offered her a gentle smile. She looked around slowly, as if taking in the room once more, making sure she remembered where she was. "How long was I sleeping?" "A little over an hour," he said. She blinked slowly and took a deeper breath. "It feels safe here," she whispered, almost like she was admitting something she had tried to hide. He didn't respond right away. Hearing that from someone who seemed so fragile stirred something inside him, something warm. It's unfamiliar but comforting. "Would you like more tea?" he asked. "It might help you feel even better." She hesitated but nodded. "If it's not too much trouble, it's no trouble at all," he said. He walked to the small kitchen, heating water quietly. As he worked, he caught himself thinking about what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know how far she had walked or how long she had been confused. He didn't know if someone was searching for her right now. What he did know was that he couldn't simply send her back into the world without understanding her situation properly. He had already made a silent promise to himself when he opened the door earlier. He wasn't going to walk away from this. When he returned with the tea, she accepted the cup gently, her fingers curling around it with appreciation. "It feels strange," she said after taking a small sip. "Being here in a stranger's home, and yet it also feels like I've known this kind of peace before." He sat down across from her again. "Do you remember anything new?" She closed her eyes slightly, searching her memory. "I remember a light near the window, and a chair with a red cushion. I remember hearing birds in the morning, but I don't know how far that place is from here." He listened closely, hoping the details meant something, but they were too general, too gentle to point to a clear location. "I think," she said with a small sigh. "My memory plays tricks on me sometimes." He didn't react too strongly, not wanting to make her feel exposed. Instead, he nodded slowly. "It happens," he said simply. "Everyone forgets things sometimes." She gave him a small smile of gratitude. Even though she knew and he knew, what she was experiencing wasn't the usual kind of forgetting, but I don't remember forgetting before. Almost to herself, he felt the weight of those words settle in the room. He didn't want to push her, didn't want to create more worry than she already felt. "Do you want to rest a bit more?" he asked gently. "No. I think I've rested enough for now." She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, sitting a little straighter. I don't want to fall asleep again and make you stay awake. You must be tired too. He shook his head lightly. I'm fine. I can rest later. She looked at him with a soft, gentle concern. You didn't expect a night like this. He almost laughed, not in a mocking way, but in a surprised acknowledgement of how true her words were. I didn't, he said. But I'm glad I opened the door. Her eyes softened in a way that almost made the room warmer. Not everyone would have, she whispered. He didn't know what to say to that. So he simply met her gaze for a moment before looking away. The quiet stretched between them, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that settles between people who are trying to figure out the next step without rushing. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice soft. I used to walk in the evenings sometimes, just to feel the air. I liked watching the sky change colors before it got dark. He nodded. That sounds peaceful, so she said, her eyes drifting toward the window. But today, I don't know how I wandered so far. I don't remember taking certain turns. I don't remember the streets looking the way they did. He watched her carefully, sensing the fear behind her calm words. It's all right, he said. You don't have to force yourself to remember everything right now. She nodded slowly, almost gratefully. You remind me of someone, she said unexpectedly. He raised his eyebrows slightly. Who? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. I don't know. Someone from long ago, maybe? Someone who used to speak gently like you. He didn't know what to do with that information, so he simply smiled politely. Her eyes lowered to the blanket in her lap. I hope whoever I gave that number to is okay, she whispered. We'll try again soon, he assured her. Maybe once the storm fully stops, the signal will be better. She accepted that answer with a soft nod. Then she looked around the living room again. Studying the walls, the shelf, the small lamp in the corner. You live simply, she said gently. He nodded. I don't need much. There's a nice feeling in that, she murmured. Sometimes simple is safer, kinder. He thought about that for a moment. She didn't talk like someone who lacked things. She talked like someone who had lived long enough to know what mattered. Rain continued to fall lightly, almost soothing now. The night felt calmer, but the uncertainty still lingered in the air. He sat there quietly as she rested her tea on the table. Do you think it's too late to try walking outside? She asked suddenly. He looked at her sharply, not out of anger, but out of worry. It's still dark, he said, and the ground is slippery. You could fall or get lost again. She lowered her head. I don't want to be a burden to you. He shook his head. You're not. You needed help, and you found the nearest door. That's not a burden. That's life. She took another slow breath, her eyes warming again. You speak kindly. It makes things feel less frightening. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone who felt like she carried the world in her soft, trembling hands. He stood up slowly. Let me get you some dry socks, he said. Your feet must be cold. She blinked at him with surprise, almost touched by the thought. You've already done so much. It's all right, he replied. He went to his room, searching through his drawers for a clean pair that would fit her. When he returned and handed them to her, she accepted them like they were something precious. You take care of others. Easily, she said quietly. I don't know about that, he replied truthfully. I can see it, she said with conviction. Her voice carried a softness that made him feel something. Warm in his chest, she changed into the dry socks slowly, carefully, then placed her wet ones near the heater to dry. She leaned back into the couch, letting her shoulders sink into the cushion. His phone buzzed suddenly. He grabbed it quickly. Hopeful, but it wasn't a return call. It was just a message notification from a delivery service. Still, the sudden sound startled her. She flinched and held onto the blanket tightly. It's just my phone, he said quickly. She relaxed a little, though her breathing stayed uneven for a moment. He felt a deep heaviness settle inside him. How long had she been living with this kind of fear, this constant doubt in her own memory? How many evenings had she walked alone, hoping she wouldn't lose her way? He sat beside the table again and looked at her with quiet concern. Tomorrow, he said, we'll figure everything out. We'll find out where you live. We'll reach someone who knows you. She looked at him with a fragile kind of hope. You'll help me in the morning? Of course, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words settle inside her like warmth. You're a good person, she whispered. He didn't answer. But something inside him stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet filled the room again. Not heavy, but gentle. She rested her hands in her lap, and he watched her with a protective calm. This night, unexpected and strange, had pulled him out of his solitude in a way he couldn't explain. And already, a part of him knew that helping her wasn't just something he wanted to do. It was something he needed to do, because sometimes life brings someone to your door not to disrupt your routine, but to show you a side of yourself you had forgotten existed. And as the drizzle outside slowly faded, he realized that tomorrow would bring answers, or challenges, or both. But whatever came next, he was ready to face it. Not for himself, but for her. The moment he stepped back inside his house after leaving the elderly woman with the neighbor, the silence felt different than before. It wasn't the peaceful silence he used to enjoy at the end of a long day. This time, it felt heavy, almost echoing with everything he had witnessed. He sat down on the old wooden chair in his small living room, his thoughts still running after the long walk in the rain. He replayed her voice in his mind, the way she held his hand and thanked him as if he had done something extraordinary. But to him, it hadn't felt extraordinary. It had felt necessary. Still, the weight of the whole experience pressed on him as he leaned back and stared at the dimly lit room. The lamp beside the couch flickered for a moment, reminding him of how earlier that evening he had been irritated about the power going out again. Now he felt almost embarrassed. Something so small had distracted him. While outside a helpless woman was wandering alone, without anyone knowing where she was, he rubbed his forehead and let out a slow breath. His clothes were still damp, but he didn't bother changing yet. His mind was too full, and he didn't want to interrupt the thoughts swirling around. He remembered how she had looked at him when he offered her tea earlier, her hands trembling, but her smile soft. He remembered how she kept apologizing, how she kept saying she didn't want to trouble him. And he remembered the neighbor's face, full of relief, telling him that she had been wandering more often because her memory wasn't what it used to be. That part stayed with him the longest. Memory fading, losing track of familiar roads, feeling lost in the same place you once knew by heart. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something that pulled deeply inside him and wouldn't let go. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, filling a glass with water. He took a slow sip, staring at the quiet space around him. His house had always been simple. A single couch, a small table, a shelf that held a few books, and a window with a curtain he always forgot to replace. He lived alone, and most days that didn't bother him. But tonight, it all felt different. The room felt emptier, as if the encounter had shifted something inside him. He placed the glass on the counter and walked back to the couch. When he sat down, he reached for the blanket folded at the end of it. He hadn't used it yet tonight, but he wrapped it around himself anyway. It was the kind of comfort he didn't realize he needed. A soft sound outside made him glance at the window. It was just the leftover raindrops sliding down the glass, but it reminded him of how stormy the night had been earlier. What if he hadn't opened the door? What if he had stayed sitting on this couch and ignored the knocking? The thought unsettled him. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, palms pressed together. He wasn't someone who liked thinking too deeply about these things. But something about this night made it impossible not to. The woman's soft voice echoed in his mind again. She had talked about her husband while they were walking. Not in long stories, just small pieces as they passed certain houses. She had said her husband used to take her on walks around this same neighborhood. She had smiled when she said it, even though her eyes looked distant, as if trying to remember something clearly. He wondered what it must feel like to forget things that matter, names, faces, places. He wondered if she ever felt scared while trying to remember her way home. He wondered if there were nights she walked alone. No one found her. The thought made his chest tighten. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling. Maybe everyone had someone like that in their life, someone older, someone who needed a bit more care. Maybe people just forgot to notice. Maybe they were too busy or too tired. Or maybe they didn't know what to do. He had always been the type to mind his own business. He worked, he ate, he slept, and he repeated. It wasn't that he didn't care about others. He just never saw himself as the kind of person who stepped forward. He always believed someone else would handle things, someone more experienced, someone more patient. But tonight, there had been no one else. Only him. He stood again, feeling restless. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The street outside was quiet now, only a few dim lights reflecting on the wet road. The storm had passed. The air looked calmer. His thoughts drifted to the moment when the neighbor recognized the woman. The relief in her voice had been so real, so full. He didn't know the neighbor's name either, but she had thanked him at least 3 times before rushing to help the old woman inside the house. He imagined the family arriving, worried, tired, maybe even guilty. He wondered if they struggled every day trying to keep her safe. Maybe they didn't have the strength or time to watch her constantly. Maybe they didn't know how to stop her from wandering. He walked back to the couch and sat again, this time leaning back fully. He let his head rest on the cushion. His body felt heavy now, as if the weight of the night had finally reached his muscles. He closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about his own life, about how he had been living quietly, with no real connections. He didn't visit many people. He didn't call anyone often. He didn't even check on his neighbors. He kept to himself, telling himself it was easier that way. But now he wondered if easy was the same as empty. He opened his eyes slowly. The room looked the same, but he didn't feel the same. Something had changed. Something had opened inside him. He stood up again, feeling a little more awake. He walked to the kitchen and warmed some leftover soup on the stove. He wasn't hungry, but he needed something warm. As the pot simmered, he leaned against the counter. He thought about the woman's small hand wrapped around his while they were walking. He remembered how she held onto his arm when the streetlights flickered, and she whispered, "Thank you for helping me." He hadn't said much in return at the time. He hadn't needed to. The moment had been quiet but meaningful. When the soup was ready, he poured it into a bowl and placed it carefully on the table. He took a seat but didn't begin eating right away. He stared at the steam rising from the bowl, thinking about the idea of helping. Not big heroic acts, just small moments, small choices. The kind of choice he made tonight when he opened the door. He picked up the spoon and took a slow bite. The warmth spread through him, but it didn't push away the thoughts. Instead, it made them clearer. He realized something simple but powerful. He wanted to be someone who didn't look away when someone needed help. He wanted to be someone who showed up. The idea settled into him like a quiet truth. He finished half the bowl and pushed it aside. He felt tired now, just physically, but emotionally. It had been a long night. He cleaned the bowl and spoon slowly, placing them in the rack to dry. When he walked to his bedroom, he paused at the doorway. He looked over his shoulder at the living room, remembering how the night had started. A normal evening. A quiet house. Nothing unusual. Then a knock had changed everything. He climbed into bed and pulled the blanket around himself. He wasn't thinking about work or chores or anything else he normally worried about. His mind stayed with the old woman, her gentle smile, her wandering steps, her confused eyes searching for something familiar. As he drifted off to sleep, one thought remained steady inside him. Sometimes, the smallest moments can change a person's life. Not because they're dramatic, but because they remind you who you could be, who you want to be. And tonight, he felt closer to that version of himself than ever before. The morning after everything happened, he woke up with a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't stress, and it wasn't sadness. It was something softer, something that felt like a quiet pull inside him. For a long moment, he lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of his little house. The night before had stayed in his mind like a story someone reads slowly. Every detail sitting clearly in his memory. He pushed the blanket aside and sat up. The air felt cooler than usual, and he wrapped his arms around himself while he tried to gather his thoughts. The old woman, her trembling hands, her tired eyes trying to recognize the streets she once knew so well. It all came back to him the moment he blinked. And it came with something else too, an unexpected sense of responsibility. His morning was slow. He made tea, sat quietly, and stared at the steam rising from the cup. Usually, he would drink quickly and start preparing for the day. But today, he held the cup in both hands, letting the warmth settle into his palms. While his mind drifted again and again to the woman he had helped, he wondered if she had slept well. He wondered if her family had stayed with her through the night. He wondered if she remembered him at all this morning. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the moments they shared were already fading from her mind. But that didn't change how those moments had shaped something inside him. After finishing his tea, he stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the road outside. The sky was clear. The night's storm had washed everything clean. The leaves on the ground glistened. The rooftops sparkled slightly under the soft morning sun, and the neighborhood looked calmer than it had in days. For a long moment, he simply watched the world outside, feeling that quiet pull again. He didn't know exactly what it meant, but he felt it strongly. He got dressed, grabbed his keys, and stepped outside. He wasn't going to work today. Instead, he walked toward the neighborhood where he had left the old woman last night. He didn't have a plan, and he wasn't sure what he would say if the family saw him. But something inside him wanted to check on her, wanted to make sure she was all right. The walk was peaceful. Birds sang from the trees, and a faint, cool breeze brushed across his face. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before: the small garden in front of a house he passed every day, the wooden bench near the lamppost, the old couple who often walked early in the morning. He realized he had been so focused on his own quiet routine that he rarely noticed the life happening around him. When he reached the street where the woman lived, guided his steps. He recognized the house by the small flower pot near the door, the same one he had seen last night. When the neighbor rushed forward, he hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should really go up to the door. What if the family thought he was interfering? What if it made them uncomfortable? Before he could turn around, the neighbor who had helped last night stepped out of her house. She saw him and smiled warmly, walking toward him with a relieved expression. "You came," she said. "I hoped you would." He was surprised, unsure how to respond, but her calm tone made him relax a little. "How is she?" he asked quietly. The neighbor's smile softened. "She's resting. Her family came right away last night. They were worried, but they're grateful you found her." He nodded slowly, feeling a small knot in his chest loosen. "They want to say thank you properly," she added. "They were hoping you might stop by." He didn't know how to explain that he wasn't looking for gratitude. He had simply done what felt right. But he followed the neighbor to the door anyway, because something inside him wanted to see the woman again. When the door opened, a woman in her 40s stepped out. Her eyes were tired but kind, and when she saw him, she didn't hesitate for a moment. She stepped forward and wrapped him in a grateful hug. It startled him at first, but he slowly raised his hand and patted her shoulder gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for bringing her home. We were so scared when we couldn't find her. We thought—" She cut herself off and took a deep breath. "You don't know how much it means to us." He shook his head softly. "I'm just glad she's okay." "Would you like to see her?" she asked. He hesitated again, then nodded. She led him inside. The house was warm and filled with the soft scent of tea. The living room was cozy, with photos on the walls and shelves full of memories. He could tell it was a home full of stories. The elderly woman sat in a cushioned chair near the window, a blanket over her lap. She looked peaceful, her hands resting gently on the fabric. For a moment, he wondered if she would recognize him. When her eyes lifted and met his, she blinked slowly and tilted her head. Then a small smile spread across her face. "You helped me," she whispered. He felt something warm spread through his chest. She remembered. Even if only a little, he walked toward her and sat in the chair beside her. "How are you feeling today?" he asked softly. "Better," she replied, her voice faint but steady. "I wandered too far, but you walked with me. You didn't leave me." He didn't know what to say. The moment felt too gentle to interrupt with words. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, fragile, familiar. "You were kind," she whispered. He swallowed, his throat tightening. "Anyone would have helped." "Not everyone does," she said, her voice soft, yet full of truth. Her daughter placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's right. Not everyone stops. Not everyone listens." He didn't respond. Instead, he stayed there for a few minutes, listening as the old woman talked quietly about small things, flowers, the weather, and the way she used to walk with her husband. She told the stories slowly, sometimes pausing to find the right words. He listened patiently, careful not to rush her. After a while, the family invited him to stay for tea. The conversation was simple and warm. He learned that they had been doing their best to care for her, but it was becoming harder, especially when she wandered without warning. He left their home later that morning with a fuller heart and a deeper understanding of how many people quietly struggle around him. Unnoticed, he walked back home slowly. But as soon as he stepped inside, his house felt different again. It wasn't heavy this time, it was more like the silence had softened, becoming a place where something new was beginning. He sat down at his small table and thought deeply. He knew he didn't want that night to be the last time he helped someone. He didn't want this experience to become just a memory. Something inside him had shifted and he didn't want to ignore it. That afternoon, he opened his laptop and searched for volunteer programs in his area. Places where people helped elderly individuals or those who struggled with memory. It didn't take long before he found a small community center that welcomed volunteers. He didn't hesitate. He filled out the form, pressed submit, and sat back in his chair. He felt nervous, but also strangely excited. The feeling was new, unfamiliar, but good. A few days later, he visited the community center for the first time. The staff were kind, and the place felt warm. He was introduced to several elderly people there, each with their own stories and challenges. Some remembered things clearly, others forgot in moments. Some talked endlessly, others barely spoke at all. But each one had something in their eyes, a quiet hunger for company. For someone who cared enough to sit with them, he helped in small ways, at first handing out cups of water, reading simple stories aloud, guiding slow steps down the hallway. He realized that every little thing mattered. A smile, a calm voice, a moment of patience. One afternoon, while he was helping fold blankets, he thought about the old woman again. He wondered if she was having a good day. He wondered if she was sitting near her window, enjoying the sunlight. He wondered if she remembered their walk. Maybe she didn't. But that didn't change anything because he remembered. And that memory had shaped the version of himself he was becoming. Weeks passed, and he grew closer to many people at the center. He found himself looking forward to spending time there. He wasn't just filling his days anymore. He was being part of someone else's day, someone else's comfort. One sunny morning, he stopped by the old woman's house again. Her daughter opened the door and smiled brightly. "She's been asking about you," she said. He stepped inside and found the woman sitting near the window again. When she saw him, she smiled a soft, warm smile that made something inside him settle. "You came back," she said. "Of course," he replied. They spent the next hour talking, or sometimes just sitting quietly, and it felt enough. As he walked home that day, the sunlight warming his shoulders, he realized something clearly. One unexpected moment, a knock at the door. A stranger in need had changed everything. It had shown him the kind of person he wanted to be. Not someone who lived quietly on the edges of life, but someone who stepped forward. Someone who cared. Someone who chose to help, even when nobody asked. And he knew, deep inside, that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one shaped by kindness, purpose, and a sense of connection he had never known before. A simple choice, a small moment of compassion, to open a path that would continue shaping him for years to come.